Welcome to the Control Alt Deploy podcast. I'm Kuba Fietkevich, a co-host of the podcast and CTO of Tessavant AI, and I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Bolotsky, CEO of Tessavant. And with us, we have a special guest, Erick Herring of Vynyl.
Good to be here.
Erick, we've known each other for probably about 10 years. I believe we met at one of the LA CTO events, one of the many ones. You're, of course, well known here in Los Angeles through your company Vynyl, and you have a presence here. You have a presence in Boise. Can you give us audience who doesn't know you the high-level overview of who you are and what Vynyl does?
Yeah, for sure. So Vinyl's a product development firm. We're leaning pretty aggressively into, what we're thinking about as the AI-enabled future. We've traditionally focused on building and operating critical software products for our clients, particularly in highly regulated industries. So healthcare, lending, insurance, et cetera. We do a decent amount of work with the California universities, particularly around diagnostics for dementia and screeners. We are working on the screener for dyslexia that's being used in the majority of California public schools, together with UC San Francisco. And that'll always be core to who we are, right? We write complete, correct, secure, compliant software, deliver it on time. But we're now being asked to field, we're calling them pods of AI wranglers for our clients. We're naming is TBD on that, right? But that's what they want. They want groups of people who know how to use these tools that can come in and either fulfill their product development mission, or more and more, we're being asked to jumpstart their own internal AI development within the organization. The mission is to leave behind code bases that are AI ready, developers that are trained and have an AI software development lifecycle, and an ability, potentially without us, although we haven't gotten there yet with anybody, to build out and maintain their organization-specific tooling and evals and harnesses and things like that. So that's who Vynyl is.
LLM applications and AI agents behave in ways that software testing was never designed for. These non-deterministic systems depend on tools, retrieval data, orchestration layers, and they fail in modes that traditional quality assurance simply cannot catch. That's why we built Tessavant AI, the AI assurance and reliability platform that helps teams putting generative and agentic AI into production close that gap. Tessavant runs continuous evaluation as well as adversarial testing against your live workflows, deploys runtime guardrails at exact points where the AI system failed in practice, and produces assurance evidence that your quality, engineering, security, and compliance teams need in order to ship with measurable confidence. If you are deploying AI, then you need an AI assurance stack. So head to tessavant.ai for more details and to book a demo. Now back to the show.
For my part, I've been creating software and systems for quite a while now. I got paid to write software for the first time when I was barely a teenager. I've always thought it's a testament to my excellent planning skills that I got in exactly the right time to see all this stuff anyway. I got to meet and play along with so many smart people who made all the big stuff happen, right? I'm just very fortunate to have lived through most of the major computing revolutions, after the invention of computers, right? So my earliest experience was with Big Iron in the data centers at the local university. They let me hang out, especially if I was willing to carry punch cards for the physics grad students. I definitely wanted on the record that I never, ever swapped the cards around, even when they were rude or griped about waiting. I don't care what you've heard. I didn't do it. So yeah, I was an acolyte, at least, of the priesthood when personal computers came on the scene. And that was the first big transition. It was super educational to watch how that changed everything, changed the dynamics and the economics. I mean, I didn't know this at the time, obviously. This is in retrospect. I didn't have big thoughts at the time. I was just like, ooh, small machines. But it also changed what was possible to do and imagine. And I wanted to be down with the new machines, but they didn't really run a serious Unix. And so it was most of a decade before I took them seriously. But during that time, they were changing everything, the spreadsheet and computer on every desk and all that good stuff, right? I got a front row seat to watching the commercial internet come into existence. We were one of the early nodes on the NSF net, which was transitioned from the ARPANET, as everybody in this audience probably knows. And, I think if I recall correctly, we got hooked up just pre-DNS when we were still sending host files back and forth every so often. And near the end of my time at the university, I was a campus consultant for Next Computer. I was an actual student by that time. And that led me to being a system engineer in charge of Scandinavia for the Next Computer resellers there. And the World Wide Web was created on Next Computers. So I literally got the World Wide Web on floppy disks one day. I got postal mail from Redwood City, and there was a disk inside that said worldwideweb.app. And that felt like the biggest transition of all. I've been building applications on the web ever since. And that felt like the biggest transition of all. Maybe it was democratizing. It brought online into real life, and then all the smaller stuff along the way as well. But even after seeing all of that stuff with the perspective I think it gives me, I'm still super excited about what's happening right now. And it feels bigger. What's happening right now feels bigger, maybe bigger than everything combined. You guys lived through a lot of this, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But we're going to get into some of that, I guess. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring you on the podcast precisely because you have that kind of large perspective. So I want to get your perspective on building and testing and securing LLM-based applications, and particularly with the kind of customers that you serve, right? Run ones in regulated industries, finance, insurance. So maybe we can start with some high-level trends. Is there anything that you're seeing in generative AI, what your customers are asking you to do right now?
And there's a lot of different ways to answer that question, right? It's hard for the customers, for the clients to know what to ask for because this is all still so new, right? So the pace of change is crazy. It can be a full-time job just to keep up, which is to say you can't keep up. We're working proactively. We as a company are working proactively with our own people and with our clients to help manage their learning efforts, right? But also to stay on top of and help everyone manage their mental state. Like if you want to talk about trends in generative AI, I think the trend is towards frenzy and mania. And I'm joking, but I do think that there's a lot about this new AI enabled software development that is bad for human brains. So this shows up for us when we are communicating with our clients and partners all the time. Some of them are clueless. We tell them what we think and try and pull them along. Some of them have convinced themselves that software is essentially going to be written autonomously and doesn't need software engineers anymore. And they just want one developer to write all their software, which is interesting, right? And like simultaneously,
in your client engagements, are you seeing that people are expecting you to do more with fewer engineers?
They definitely are hoping that we will do more with fewer, but they don't know yet or what's reasonable to ask for. And it's hard to fault them. Clients are always, I don't have to tell you, clients are always I want it now. I want it yesterday. I want it better and I want more tomorrow. And so that's great. That just comes with the territory of doing client work. These current tools we've got are really trying to turn all of us into solo code machines. And that's not good. Like it comes with all sorts of tripwires and pitfalls as these new processes and flows interact with our squishy monkey brains. And so our clients have the same issue, right? They don't know what it's reasonable to ask for. And you have to be careful talking to them because you have to find the right way to say that, like, yes, everything has changed, but also nothing has changed. Like we're still years, probably. I mean, maybe days, we don't know, right? But probably years away from the robot being on pager duty. When the call comes at 3 a.m. and your critical system is down, it's still a human who's going to field it, right? And so you can't have all the knowledge about your system in, encrypted robot language on a private robot Slack. Hey, you still have to have Jira. You don't necessarily have to have all the ceremonies and all the Scrum stuff the same way as you had it in the past, but you got to have the ability for both the humans and the robots to collaborate together on creating the code and solving code problems, especially production and security problems. So that's a lot of words to say that different clients are asking for different things at different times, different levels of sophistication, just like you would expect. Like this is also new.
Are you finding though that their sophistication level is still fairly low compared to the hype?
Absolutely. I mean, practically speaking, the whole world changed on February 5th, right? Like just over a month ago. It's funny. 12 days, on the 17th or 18th, we were having a meeting of our senior people in the company. And I said what I just said. I said, the whole world changed on the 5th. And they were like, why didn't anybody tell us? I'm like, it's 12 days later. I'm telling you right now. It just happened. I just realized it today.
What was the change?
I mean, Opus 4.6 and GPT 3.5 codecs are just fundamentally different. Like, we had inklings that someday we were going to be able to really rely on and lean into these tools before that. But after that, it actually was possible. Like, if you'd asked me on February 4th, when are we going to have the ability to really, do pair programming with our intelligent AI buddy, I would have said, I don't know. Like, lots of models coming out, lots of things happening, but a year, a couple of years, maybe, certainly in 5 years. I would have said something like that, probably. On February 6th, I was starting to realize that we were there.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
we switched from senior engineers to managers basically overnight.
Yeah, and not everybody's going to make that switch, are they?
Or supervisors.
Supervisors,
yes,
exactly.
The people that are making the switch, you think they're going to move significantly faster than those that are not? Is it still feasible for those who are not using these kinds of tools to still remain productive enough to be competitive?
I mean, there's going to be an interregnum here where talented engineers can probably survive without doing much in the way of using AI tooling, but it's going to be short. And after a certain point, which we may already have passed, honestly, like, it's hard to know, but after a certain point, the people who are not leaning hard into it are going to be at best Luddites. Like, I think the Luddites get a lot of disrespect, right? They broke up those weaving looms for a reason, right? They were mad that people were taking their jobs away, and so I don't disrespect the Luddites. All respect to taking control of your economic destiny. But that's the best case. The best case is we see these people who are not adopting as technological as software development Luddites. And the worst case is we just assume they were never really that excited about creating things in the first place. But the truth is, not every engineer is motivated by the end result. Lots of engineers get dopamine and serotonin from lining up the semicolons and naming variables in exactly the right way so that when they appear on lines next to each other, the two variables have the same number of characters in their monospace font and line up perfectly. Right? I'm going to the extreme, but that's true. There's a certain kind of brain that thrives on the process. And those people are not going to make it.
I'm definitely in that camp.
Me too. And I bet you're working really hard on your mental plasticity so that you're not one of the ones who doesn't make it. I am for sure. I'm trying to take joy in creating things and experimentation.
Well, you just have to, move into the product manager role.
Well,
which can be
the way I see
satisfying.
it also is that we're basically, the tools are really good at coding and maybe not necessarily so great at engineering, right? Coming up with new things and building new things. Do you feel that way, or do you feel they're more than just kind of code assistants, right? Taking their trained knowledge of all the public GitHubs out there, right? And showing you an efficient way potentially maybe to write some code. But are they engineers? Is Opus a replacement for the engineering mind?
I'll answer that first with a little joke that we'll probably all think is funny. Maybe nobody else will, but people used to say machines will never be able to think. And I would usually respond with something along the lines of, that's okay. Most people don't either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it's true. And then people were like, well, it's a stochastic parrot. It's just, completing the next plausible tokens. And I'm like, what are people doing most of the time? 90% of the people you meet, especially you're having a beliefs-based conversation or something. And we've all seen this in the current political environment, right? You're having some kind of a beliefs-based conversation with somebody, especially somebody who doesn't agree with you. And the words that come out of their mouth, I mean, if you recorded them and transcribed them down and then tried to do any sort of a, thought pattern analysis, and I'm sure we're guilty the other way, right? I mean, our brains are not thinking machines. Our brains are justification machines. And so having thinking machines that actually think in a way that we would recognize algorithmically is kind of interesting. And so does it really matter if the intelligence is of a very specific kind? But the question you ask is, are they engineers? And of course they're not. Like our whole focus right now is on tooling, custom tool, adopting other people's tools that are great. And it's mostly around guardrails because these tools really shine currently in the planning phase. They are amazingly good code interlocutors. They're just good to talk with about code. Like they're good to plan with. They take good notes. Like every time you've ever been to a meeting where you said a bunch of smart stuff and you realize the person who was taking notes wrote, Kuba said smart stuff, and you're supposed to remember it. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I certainly have. And I'm like, you didn't write it down? I could never possibly repeat that, right? Well, the AI takes the notes, right? I'm like, damn, that was smart. Why didn't anybody remember what I said? And so, no, it's not a good engineer, but it's a good programming partner.
And I agree with you. Like people that complain a lot about AI slop, right? There's this term out there like AI slop. I always say, well, yeah, that's just replacing human slop. It's not replacing anything like genius level, but there's so much human generated trash out there that it's not surprising that it's being replacing. But speaking of that, I guess we go a little deeper into the use cases of what is AI being considered for? What jobs are they right now replacing? In essence, what tasks are the biggest ones that they're set out to to look to take care of?
So I know there's a lot of headlines around AIs taking this job and that job, and we're firing these X thousand people because of AI and blah, blah, blah. I think that is mostly nonsense. Could be wrong. I don't know everything, but I think it's mostly nonsense. I think it's mostly reactions to the cessation of a zero rate reality. So money costs something now. I think there is an accounting backlog related to the cessation of the research and development tax credit that has now been reinstated. So we'll see what happens there. But I don't know if you guys remember, but well, I'm sure you do. You run your own company. So, Trump's people turned off the research and development tax credit, which essentially made a certain portion of your developers free if you knew how to take advantage of it. I mean, free because they were creating economic value and performing the research and development mission, right? And so that happened. And there was just a glut of overhiring during the pandemic. And I think what we're seeing now is a lot of companies using the cover of AI to right the ship on that. And at the same time, I don't think they're being stupid. I think they're also using the opportunity to get rid of low performers and people they don't think are going to make the jump to using AI tooling. And so I think there's a kind of a big combination of things, but I think it's mostly economic and not related to productivity gains or AI replacement. So the jobs we're seeing are jobs that wouldn't have been done before or would have been done poorly before. An example is so there's a legal client we have, and there is an obligation that they had to answer questions related to cases underway. And that was done poorly, and it was accepted by everyone that it was done poorly. The turnaround time was high, et cetera, right? Because it was just a human activity, and you couldn't have a room of 30 associates dedicated for 3 years to waiting by the phone to answer questions in a timely way. So, you get the questions a week later, you'd get an answer. It was probably not complete. You would repeat that cycle 2 or 3 times. And 2 months later, you might have the answer to your question, which they were obligated to give you. Right. And so we're building a system and it's in use now, but we're still finishing it up for commercial release that is going to make that be an instantaneous thing. It's a chat bot. You can just go and you can ask the court documents and the various records these questions, and you'll get an immediate answer. And of course, there's a little footer disclaimer that says you're not talking to a person. Take it with a grain of salt. You're responsible for verifying all that good stuff that you have to have on the AI, right? But that job just wouldn't have gotten done or wouldn't have gotten done efficiently. And that's where we're seeing the most focus. We don't currently have any clients, which is not to say nobody does, just to be crystal clear, but we're not currently having clients asking us to build systems that are going to let them fire a bunch of people. I assume that's coming, but it hasn't happened with us yet.
They don't say it publicly, but yeah, and also like abilities is not really there, so it's just ability to augment and improve their current capabilities. How do you assure that what you're building does what it's supposed to? Right? There's this notion that, of course, LLMs and AI is probabilistic and non-deterministic kind of. So in these high compliance, high risk companies, how are you making sure that AI does what it is designed to do?
I mean, I'm probably a little contrarian on this point. Maybe I'm not in this group, but but I think I probably am in my industry segment. I didn't know specifically what the code was doing in the first place before AI. Like I didn't. I hired people, I trained them, I had standards, that they were held to. We talked to the client, we tested, we had unit tests, integration tests, different levels of tests up and down the stack. And so from my perspective, which I think is important, nothing has changed. It's just the way that we are holding the code writers, which were humans and now are AI, right? The way we're holding the writers of the code accountable are changing in positive ways. So before we were like, don't write bad code, test your code, make sure it passes all the unit tests. No, stop writing the unit test that way. You're testing the mock. You're not testing the testing the functionality, right? Stop it, right? And you don't have to do any of that anymore. Somebody was joking that when you have a junior programmer and they make a mistake, you have to like walk around the block with them and buy them a cup of coffee, put your arm around their shoulders, tell them it's going to be okay. With the AI, you're just like, do it again and do it better. And the joke was that he obviously preferred the second thing, right? And so, we do make guardrails. We write a lot of code and we have the AI write a lot of code that we then verify, as humans, we verify the guardrail code even more closely than we verify the production code to make sure that we are testing what we think we're testing, to make sure that the system is using all the available tools to write correct code. And there's a lot of tools available, right? I mean, things that were not possible with humans for practical reasons are possible with AI. And when I say things, I mean things like formal verification, things like rigorous pre and post condition testing, things like 100% test coverage, things like semantically enforced intermodule, a lot of those things were like good ideas that only existed in academia because it was not going to be ever practical to roll that out to your 200 engineers and have them do it in any, execute those processes in any consistent and good way. But the LLMs will do it every time, and they'll do it without complaint, and they'll do it fast. So that's what we're focused on. And I think we're going to be proven right because the models and the harnesses are going to keep getting better while we are exercising our muscles at building guardrails to keep the AI on track. And so those two things are going to meet somewhere where the amount of correct code approaches 100%. I don't know when that's going to be. From 0 to 36 months from now.
That's from 0. Yeah, it's that quick. But just to clarify, when you say guardrails, is it to kind of curtail or to bind the output of the LLMs, or the code, the guardrails to keep what you're developing, where you're designing, going?
Yeah, most of what I was just talking about was around producing code as opposed to systems level guardrails. I mean, the same thing is kind of true with an AI enabled system, a chatbot or whatnot. It is true. It's just different. It's a different form, right? And so if you've got an eval harness and you've got robust evals for your chatbot, then you have everything you need to make robust guardrails at runtime. Right. And so then you just have to do it, which doesn't mean it's today going to be perfect. Right. But I think, again, the improvements that we're going to see from the models and harnesses, and I'm not going to say increasing size of context windows. I'm going to say increasingly efficient use of context, because we're still learning what that even means. I think is going to get us to high degrees of certainty in the correctness of the chatbot or the retrieval or whatever that might be that you're using the agents for.
What's changed really is that there's an extra evaluation step and
100%.
testing.
We're testing more.
And we're testing more, and we have to. But then we get into like, what is good enough? How do you guys determine that?
I mean, to a certain extent, that hasn't changed.
Well, it used to be binary, right? It either works or it doesn't. Or am I wrong?
I see what you mean. Well, I mean, in big complex systems, like there were 100 things that could binarily work or not, right? And 1,000 things. Still true. Overall, does everything have to work before you declare that the system works? I mean, typically not. You're like, well, we're using it in production, but the Salesforce updater is not working. We'll get that fixed at some point. Until then, we're sending emails to the customer service reps and they're entering it by hand, right? Like, do you pull that software out of production? No. I mean, that's just an acceptable defect.
So like maybe in your legal summarization case, right? Where every word has meaning. And so a wrong summarization can have really drastic impacts.
I mean, it's an interesting question, right? This is why most of the lawyers we talk to are pretty sanguine about, everybody's like, AI is going to replace lawyers. And the lawyers are like, good luck with that, because robots can't be legally liable. Robots can't lose their bar, can't lose their bar license, their law license. And so the question is not, would you launch a system that makes mistakes in the scenario you're talking about, in many scenarios like that. The question is, how do you disclaim it, and how do you make sure you're not going to be held liable for those mistakes in a hopefully responsible way, right? You also want to tell people what they need to know in order to make good decisions, right? But you and I both know that disclaimers are seldom read and seldom paid attention to by the vast majority of users. And so at that point, I mean, security is interesting, right? Security, I was a chief security officer for several years. After 9/11, actually, I took a sharp right turn into security. I realized I knew as much about security as anybody, just coming up the way I did in development. And I was like, I'm going to secure the nation and do my part, right? And I realized a few years in that the entire job of security was just telling people no. And the secondary job was making sure that when you got sued, that you at least couldn't be held negligible, right? You avoid the treble damages. That was it. That was the whole job of security. It wasn't actually to make systems secure. Like, that was hopefully a byproduct that happened. Like, everybody was happy if that happened. But really, they just wanted to make sure they didn't get too screwed when they did get sued, and that nobody was doing anything particularly innovative, because innovation brings risk. And so I got back out of security because I just couldn't do that. I almost had a cardboard printout of myself saying no put in my office at one point. I was so frustrated. But that's the thing, right? So disclaimers. This is not legal advice, right? This is not medical advice. Like, WebMD has been doing this for forever in a much less sophisticated way. Well, maybe it is worse because the AI can put together very plausible, very detailed stuff that could be very wrong in very bad ways. So I think it might be worse in degree, but I'm not sure it's worse from a legal perspective, if that makes sense.
So, kind of going down the security path, one of the things that we've seen companies struggle with in terms of definition of who owns kind of the testing or AI red teaming component of testing these systems. And my contention is that red teaming is actually the wrong term here. It should be possibly like AI assurance, because we're not really talking always about security. It's certainly a component of it. And certainly for chatbots, where, prompt steering, jailbreaking is a big component of that. But, LLM-based systems are reliable, not just because they're not jailbroken, but they're reliable because they don't hallucinate, they don't provide bias, and all those other things. And so with your description of, right, the security apparatus, right, is just don't get sued, is not the right place for ensuring a reliable system. So where do you think this should live, um, this function?
I mean, that's a super interesting question. We're obviously thinking about it as well. I mean, right now, the most successful instances we've seen of assurance, I like that word, have the foxes are guarding the hen house, in a sense, right? The developers who know how this stuff works are the ones who are actually also, red teaming it. They're the only ones who understand the attack surface. They're the only ones who understand all the different ways it can go wrong. I don't know if you read the paper. It's pretty recent, so it might not have crossed your desk yet, but it was basically a study on ontological reframing. And so basically they figured out how to do talk therapy with the AI and get it to do all sorts of crazy stuff, just bypass its safety guardrails completely, and like collaborate with them in bypassing the safety guardrails. And it was very much like the analogy, it was either that or another paper. The analogy was that basically using words, right, because that's the input you have to the AI, that they were giving the AI drugs. They were drugging the AI and then convincing it to tell them secrets. It was just like, CIA interrogation. It's a fascinating paper. And security departments are not prepared to understand that. CFOs are not prepared to understand that. The IOs are not prepared to understand that. Not today. Honestly, if I showed up in a boardroom, whatever hat I had on, even with my nice gray hair, if I showed up in my boardroom and started rambling about what I just said to you to like the board about how we needed to be worried about it with X, Y, and Z deployment of software that was happening, they would be just as likely to throw me out as anything. They'd be like, you're crazy. You're insane. You can't give computers drugs. I'm like, no. It's an analogy. Yeah, get out. So I don't know. I don't know if there is a place for it to live yet. I think we need it. I mean, where does it live today, right? That's what I always think about. Where does it live today? And where it lives today, so like a chatbot, right? The chatbot is replacing or supplementing the human beings who answer the phones or answer the chats. And so where it lives today is with the line managers of those employees. You know, if the employees just start saying random nonsense, then they, get feedback from the customer satisfaction survey and somebody listens to the tapes back and they're like, Bob is saying some nonsense. And so Bob gets counseled and, maybe fired, change the training to make sure it doesn't happen again. But it's the same thing with the AI employees. I think that's how we got to think about them. They are just employees that operate faster and don't take lunch breaks. And so maybe it doesn't belong with any technical department or security department. Maybe it still belongs with the line manager, and maybe they have to maybe they have to participate in a very meaningful way in building the evals and monitoring systems that make sure these things stay on track, but which is going to change their skill set. Right? It's going to make them in some sense more technical, or at least make them more informed about the capabilities of the technology, and maybe change the profile of the person who does that job until that person is also replaced by AI.
Yeah, what's worse is that it's not, to me, it's the biggest trouble is that it's not that these chatbots are producing nonsense, is that they're producing convincing enough content that could be in some way harmful to the company, harmful to even the end user, right? So, and they seem quite certain until you go, wait a second. It's like this meme where somebody's laying in the hospital and clearly just been restored from near death, and the AI says, "You're right. That mushroom was poisonous, right?" And so initially it was like, "Yeah, you're right. This is a great thing to eat."
I
This
saw
is
that one. You're
yeah,
absolutely correct. I'm sorry.
yeah. And I keep pointing out this happened in real life very recently with Clawbot, with OpenClaw. There was the viral post of somebody at Meta using it, basically unleashing it onto their inbox, and the thing starts deleting everything. And you see, she posted the screenshots of her interaction on WhatsApp or Telegram, something like that. And it's just the bot is doing all kinds of things like delete, and her interaction is just these big, bold, stop, open class, stop doing that. And then she goes, I told you not to delete anything. He's like, you're right. You did say that. My bad. Uh, okay. So that's the more harmful thing is that it's basically able to really be convincing.
I mean, isn't it the fully robotic robot from RoboCop? Remember the big
The big
robot
giant one, right? That shot everything.
that kills everybody.
Yeah.
And like maybe it wasn't such a good idea not to have a human in the robot. Yeah.
How do you test for these kinds of things? Like in a broader sense, what role does QA in your mind play right now? We've talked to folks that are saying there's somewhat of a trend with clients that they think that QA is not really necessary as much anymore. I feel the opposite. I feel like it's even more necessary. And maybe to some extent, this is where the testing of AI is going to end up almost permanently living because, like Kuba mentioned, that it's not always security minded. It's this quality of the AI to assure that the application stays within the LLM stays within the bounds that the app is meant to do. Well, how do you feel about that? The QA is not really necessary anymore, and what role do they have to play now and in the future?
So I've always been particularly attuned. One of the reasons I talked about the different technology revolutions I've gotten a chance to watch is because at every stage I've been very attuned and have no idea why, by the way, probably science fiction reading, but I've been very attuned to things that compress or collapse time and space. And what I mean by that, like cars collapse space, they compress space, right? So it used to be cities were 30 miles apart because that's how far you could ride on a horse if you were just going from city to city. You couldn't ride further. So like Fort Worth and Dallas are 30 miles apart for exactly that reason. That's a 1-day horse ride. And, now the car, it's 35 minutes, right? Changed everything. It created suburbia, like so forth and so on, right? And so that's space, right? And lots of technologies compress space. And the technologies we're talking about compress time, right? And so when you compress time, all the things that used to have a certain order for good reason, because of the time regime that you were living in, fall apart. QA, in many ways, has been viewed as a discrete step, and it can't be that anymore, which is why I like the assurance framing so much, right? The truth is that QA is more important than it ever has been, but not as a step. It's important as a continuous process. And that changes the kinds of tests that you run. It changes the kinds of automated tooling that you create to run those tests. It changes the kinds of manual testing that you do, right? Because even if you had a 100% perfect QA process, it would still take as a step. I mean, if you still had a step in your process that was perfect, 100% perfect, it's going to take longer. If not today, then soon, it's going to take longer to run that step than is the cycle time for the code. And so you're just going to be changing the code so fast that you never actually get to run through a complete QA step. Does that make sense? And so with that happening, it can't be a discrete step anymore. Or if it's a discrete step, it has to be an asynchronous discrete step. So you're kind of doing it in the background and kind of opportunistically surfacing bugs. I'm talking about human QA now, right? That then get fed back into the machine to get fixed. But while all that's happening, you need some deterministic processes and probably some stochastic processes as well, right? But I'm just thinking about the deterministic processes that kind of run constantly. And engineers with no testing training shouldn't be developing that tooling. People who actually understand the testing process, who understand the assurance process, and also understand the unique challenges brought by the new speed of the code and the new sloppiness of the code, because there's going to be some of that for a while, maybe forever. Those are the people who need to be writing the continuous processes that run alongside. And that goes hand in hand with observability, right? And so we need a much more robust observability conception than we have. Observability today is, I send this to Sentry, I send that to Datadog, I send this over to this other place, I write this to some files, right? That's in CloudWatch. We got to stop all that. The observability needs to be unified, it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be accessible to the people who are assuring the quality, because that's going to be one of your primary signals is the telemetry. Right? How is this thing behaving? What kinds of errors are we seeing? What kinds of things that don't look like errors that actually are errors are we seeing? How do we find that out? How do we find patterns? And we've got tooling for all this, but it's a different way of thinking about it. So I guess my basic conclusion is that you're not going to run out of work.
No, that's great. That's exactly what I was hoping to understand.
I don't see how you can. I just don't see how you can. I mean, I think there's a lot of people are going to get rid of the QA step completely, and the industry, humanity is going to cycle through those people who think it's a bad idea, hopefully pretty soon, because the sheer amount of software that's coming at us now is going to multiply. And the assurance process, the testing process is more important than it has ever been.
Yeah. But I mean, even from my personal experience, I have many years in QA, and there's a never ending kind of a list of stories where when development pushes a build out into QA, they're almost certain that it works. To their mind, I tested it, I did some unit tests, it works quite well. And then they kind of sit there surprised when I send them back a list of bugs, right? And in certain cases, it's corner cases and situations that they really couldn't think of. And so I've had many times experience where like the smartest developer on the dev team sit back and go, wow, okay, so there is a need for you guys. I never thought that this could be like that, because they sincerely think that they're releasing something that works really, really well. Like they looked at, they checked out everything. It's to them, it feels like it shouldn't break in any way. And now with the LLM being an integral part of these applications, there is this element that they can't necessarily, in the way that they think that their code is pretty structured and does what it's supposed to do. So I feel like what traditionally would be is that QA gets the build, they see the requirements, they build their test plans, their test cases, and then they run through manual tests. When the manual test is stable, they'll push that to automation, and automation will then basically automate all the manual steps, and they can run a suite, saving a whole lot of time, right? Now, your first attempt, and then in essence, the manual step now could show, success, but it's running it 100 times, running it at 1,000, maybe even more times, right? Is where you're going to start to see the probability of failure start to come out. So now it's like, I think automation is more important and becoming kind of more the first steps. And then the human tester is there to find all the weird creative ways that it can manipulate the system. And it's important for both.
I mean, that leads me to a couple of other thoughts that I had actually written down and then forgot about them. So that's a great reminder. I was saying earlier, there's all these techniques that are not tenable with humans, right? And one of those techniques that I've been thinking a lot about lately is like more rigorous mutation testing, right? There's just not a good way to do that in a principled way with human only processes. And suddenly that becomes very tractable. Like you can do fuzz testing, you can do various kinds of mutation testing, you can do AST aware traversals and like do analysis on the graphs from that. But all that requires a certain adversarial mindset um, to to do properly. And the second thought that leads me to is the fact that we are just squishy brains at the end of the day. If your brain has oxygen and enough sugar, you know, if you let it do what it wants to do, it's going to sit on the couch and watch TV.
Mhm.
Like that's it. It's going to sit in the sun, and if you're lucky, read a book. Like that's all your brain wants to do. And so these tools sit there and they're like, okay, I did a thing. Is that okay? Can I keep going? Okay, I can keep going. Okay, so I did another thing. Can I keep going? And you're just sitting there, yes, 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 yes. You almost never say no. And that gets your brain into a certain track. And the truth is, after you've done that for 2 or 3 hours, and if we listen to the hype, you're doing it across like 15 different agent runs because you're working on 15 different things at one time, because of course human brains can do that, right? And so you're working on all these things. Yes, 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 yes. No, minor correction. Yes, 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 yes. Then you go on to review PRs, right? Because we still have to review our PRs. That's not going to be automated for a minute. Hopefully it will someday, because the truth is you take that yes, yes, yes mindset into the PRs, and your brain, because it's just spent hours saying yes, 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 is like predisposed to be like, looks good to me, right? And so the QA process needs to be inserted into all of that, into the developer experience overall, in a way that it hasn't been so far. I think there's real developer psychology to be applied here, really real adversarial quality thinking to be applied to how that all flows, and probably to looking at the traces from all of that, the telemetry from all of that, to see which developers are particularly prone to just like yesing bugs into existence. And I think that's all just green field for us to explore and make better. I think there's so much to do here. So.
Well, this has been a fantastic and fascinating conversation, Eric. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our audience appreciates this as well.
Well, thank you for having me. This was super fun. We'll have to do it again in 3 months, see if all the answers stay the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is Control Alt.
Thanks, Eric.